Well, the exciting coaching carousel seems to have finally come to a stop. And now that the whole search is over, and I know we had an emergency podcast back on Sunday, hopefully we won't have to be talking about Indiana looking for a new guy to run the program for at least another few years. We're going to talk about Mike Woodson and Scott Dolson and the introductory press conference they had on Monday. We're going to dive into some possibilities for assistant coach. We're going to talk about what Woodson's priorities should be and so much more here on our 109th, the official podcast of Indiana HQ. Our mission and goal is simple. We want to bring in-depth analysis and coverage to as many IU sports fans, of as many IU sports as possible, to as many fans as possible across a multitude of modern platforms. We're recording this edition of the Hoosier Sound on March 30th, 2021, where I am your host, Nithin Christian. Here with me tonight is my usual podcast co-host, Matt Lukens. Matt, I know you were tuned into the press conference yesterday. It was pretty interesting as far as the press conference curve is concerned. What stood out to you in the hour or so that Mike Woodson and Scott Dolson spoke?
Well, the first thing that stood out to me is the lack of Zoom knowledge from people over the age of 50. It was kind of funny to watch. Not only Coach Woodson struggle with some of the questions, but also the journalists themselves struggled to get the questions across. Some of y'all might want to contact Comcast and get your internet fixed because
it's been a year.
I know, my God, I can't. No, this is the first time I've watched an IU press conference in quite a long while, and if every single one is like that, my goodness, come on, guys. But back to the main things. One, it was nice to see Coach Woodson obviously there. Noah and I did an emergency podcast after he was hired. Nithin was on a couple plane rides and was not available. So you're going to hear his first thoughts on the hire and everything here in a second. But I'll finish up quickly so he can get to his thoughts. But it was nice to see, of course, Coach Woodson up at the podium and talking. He's a bit of a slow talker, but you can tell he really thinks about every word that he says, which is Absolutely awesome, and that'll speak to recruits and their families very well. And then also it's nice to see Thad Matta in the room. Going to be working hand in hand with Scott Dolson and Coach Woodson. I knew I was going to do that once. I told my parents yesterday because I was at the dinner table and I said Coach Wooden one time, Coach Woodson, Coach Woody. And nice to see them working together. It's going to be a lot of fun, a little bit nerve-wracking, but also very exciting to see what they're going to do with the program the next couple of weeks. So Nithin, what were your original reactions to it? We haven't had you on the podcast yet, and you always have a unique perspective on these things.
It's been a wild, crazy days, but when it's all said and done, look, I think Indiana's program, frankly, got better once they dismissed Archie Miller as the head coach. Okay, once he made that move, it was hard to really whiff on this hire. And look, it's still an attractive job. May not be as attractive as it was 10 or 20 years ago, but it's still an attractive job and attracted a lot of big names. And Mike Woodson is a big name. Don't overlook that. Here is a guy who is, like you guys said on the podcast Sunday, has coached a ton of NBA legends, contemporary legends, when it comes to the best players in the league. And his pull is so powerful in the basketball world. And I'm not going to sit here and predict Indiana going to win 30 games every year because that's not going to happen. But don't brush this off as some sort of average, safe move that Scott Dolson was able to pull off. Mike Woodson is one of the most coveted, wisest people in the entire NBA. And for him to set that aside and say, I'm going to come back to Bloomington and try to at least stabilize the program, that's a pretty big deal. Now, there are going to be growing pains, and there are a lot of questions still. Don't get me wrong. For example, Mike Woodson hasn't coached in the college level in his entire career, and having Thad Matta on board will help that. Going out and hiring some assistants familiar to the college game as it currently is will help that as well, because even with Thad Mata's been out of the game for 4 or 5 years, and that's a pretty big deal. The Big Ten now is much different than it was 5 years ago. So when it's all said and done, I think Indiana fans can sleep well at night knowing that Mike Woodson's leading the program. But it won't be, sunshine and rainbows and flowers and, perfection from day one. It will be a process. It will be gradual. And, of course, the biggest question that is there in the short term is which players are going to come back, which players are going to move on. And that is going to really shape the expectations for this Indiana basketball program as far as year one's concerned. And, with this press conference yesterday, we heard Woodson cover a wide variety of topics. He talked about Bob Knight first.
Yeah.
He talked about Bob Knight right off the bat, which was encouraging and heartwarming, honestly, to hear. He said he didn't expect much of a college adjustment from the NBA. He talked about the offensive defensive system. And Matt, I'm just going to throw this to you. He talked about the three-pointer a whole lot. I know that caught your ears, didn't it? You should, and I think Hoosier Nation should, expect a much more professional NBA-style three-point heavy offense once Woodson takes over from day one.
Absolutely. I mean, his Knicks team, and he was the coach of the Knicks in 2012-ish, had Carmelo Anthony, the last really good Knicks team. This Knicks team is decent, but they'll get there eventually. They have Worldwide West and some good people in charge there. But the last good Knicks team that was fighting for an Eastern Conference championship, they were like the best three-point shooting team basically ever until the Warriors came around, as far as percentage-wise. Like I remember vividly the Mike Novak on that team shooting three-pointers with Carmelo Anthony and them playing the Heat.
Steve Novak. I don't want to upset the Novak family.
Sorry, Novak family. The Steve Novak and Carmelo Anthony, because I was a Heat fan, so I followed, obviously, all the Eastern Conference contenders very closely. And I remember being like, God, I don't want to play that team. They shoot the three-pointer really well. And then, lo and behold, that's what the NBA has turned into, which is a three-point shooting slugfest, which is a lot of fun. But again, Coach Woodson was on the forefront, on the front foot of changing basketball. That was a change that he made. Throwing back, I know you brought up Mike Brown, but our coach Larry Brown, sorry. God, everybody's named Mike today. Everybody's named Mike. I can't stand it. My brain is melting here. But anyway,
take a lap, Matt.
Coach Brown and Coach Woodson worked together with the Pistons, and then it was there that they revolutionized pick and roll defense. And the reason why we have all these different coverages of the pick and roll was not always the case before. And switching and so often with that team, and the Pistons defense was so good that they won 2 NBA titles, right? These people are now in charge of the program, which is fantastic. And another thing they brought up, Nithin, I know you tweeted about it on the Hoosier Sound Twitter account, which you should absolutely go and give us a follow, was zone defense. He brought up zone, and you were like, huh? Zone? What is this? My goodness. And I was talking to a couple of my friends this weekend that we were watching Syracuse play, and I'm like, gosh, I hate the zone. They're like, why? It works. And I'm like, I know, but we never play zone. So therefore, everybody that plays zone are cheaters because it works so well. But now you talked about playing zone. It'd be awesome to see a program that can put out multiple defenses depending upon the situation. That's a very complicated thing to do. I was explaining this to my parents this weekend as well. So like, Matt, like, why is it good that he has NBA background? I'm like, there's a lot more coaching that goes on in one NBA game than goes on during overall the most of college basketball games. Like, one team can switch from zone to man to another zone to man in one possession. In one possession. So you have to know what to do. And coaches are pulling players aside. They're running different plays. They're writing up plays on the fly. There's so much of that, like, creativity and overall knowledge that goes into NBA coaching. That is kind of just pushed aside for, it's LeBron, it's fine, he's just going to do some stupid ISO. But that's pre-planned by the coaches. The coaches do a lot in the NBA, a lot more than people give them credit for. So bringing somebody from the top peak of their profession and bring them to IU is going to do wonders for this program.
Yeah, detractors are going to say, hey, Woodson wasn't, a real NBA title winner as a head coach, or Woodson had a lot of struggles in the playoffs, or Woodson, let's face it, he was merely an assistant in the NBA even right now before he took the job. But like I said, when it's all said and done, rest assured, Hoosier Nation can sleep well at night with Mike Woodson as the head coach. I love that you mentioned you were watching the Syracuse game. I was watching Arkansas Baylor last night in a high-level college basketball game. First of all, I'll tell you this. Indiana right now is nowhere close to either of those teams. No. And, it's embarrassing, frankly, to see the level of connectivity and intensity and just high-paced, high-quality basketball that was in that game yesterday. There is a large gap that Mike Woodson will have to, find a way to clear up, because, man, it's a big difference right now. Let's face it, Arkansas and Baylor aren't even really the cream of the crop teams in college basketball. Now, Baylor is, and Gonzaga is obviously the gold standard, at least this year. But the reason I bring that game up is because there were so many adjustments going on in the second half of that game. Baylor was throwing zones at Arkansas out of the timeout. Arkansas was running complex plays during the second half trying to come back. There were shots taken 3 to 5 seconds into the shot clock in transition. And those teams on the fast break were playing a completely different game than Indiana was in transition. So there are a lot of improvements that Woodson will have to figure out, but it all comes back to vision. And vision was a key word that was mentioned frequently by Dolson as well as Woodson during the introductory press conference. There was a question asked that I thought stood out more than any other. And it was, what vision do you have for the team in this program as far as style of play is concerned on offense and defense? And here is the quote from Woodson himself. When I look at college basketball, a lot of it is that they're taking things from the NBA right now, and their defenses are switching defenses. A lot of zone, maybe three-quarter, half-court, zone defenses. Offensively, they're shooting a lot of threes like the NBA. So when I look at college basketball and the fact that the NBA is starting to come